Hello, everyone. Wayne Motts, the President Emeritus and historian at the Gettysburg Foundation on the Gettysburg battlefield for a special segment of Walking Wednesdays with a very special guest, Dr. Damian Shiels, coming to us from across the pond. Damian, thanks for being with us. And we're going to talk about something that's near and dear to your heart.
Yes, the Irish at Gettysburg. Thanks for having me, Wayne. Thanks for organising the Irish weather today with a bit of rain and everything. It's always good to have a bit of Irish weather.
That's right. We've had rain all day. We didn't know whether we were actually going to be able to come out and do this, but it's Damian feels right at home. And Damian, before we start, why don't I just do a little orientation for everybody to show the viewers exactly where we're at. We've got all kinds of traffic going by because we're at south of the Pennsylvania Monument. The Father William Corby Monument, we'll be talking a little bit more, is right behind us. And let me just kind of show you the position we're at. So we're going to walk over here. We're going to have Sarah, she's behind the camera, and we're going to move right out here, and you can see the houses behind me. That's the George Weichard farmstead. And then we'll move over here. You'll see the barn of Abraham Trossel, and in the far distance, the Long Street Tower, which is along Seminary Ridge. And then we'll move all the way over into the distance. We'll come up here, and you'll see the three-pointed barn, which is the Nicholas Kadori barn, and the Pennsylvania Memorial here, just off my shoulder, off in the distance. And then we'll move right back around, and we'll come back out here to where we're at. So we're in the location on the second day's battle on the south end of the Pennsylvania Memorial here, on the way to Little Round Top, to discuss the Irish Brigade at Gettysburg. And Damian, you and I had a conversation off camera. The first thing I want to say is that there are more Irish troops here, ladies and gentlemen, than just the Irish Brigade. So, Damian, I want you to kind of tell us a little bit about the Irish troops and their composition and what about them, and then we'll talk specifically here. But I got to get that up front because you mentioned it. I want you to make sure you tell the viewers about that.
Well, I think it's important, Wayne. Like, the Irish Brigade are the most important unit, and there's a reason why we have Father Corby here, and they managed to get 3 monuments to the regiments involved in the action just down to the south of us. But you know, during the war, the Irish Brigade, everyone is looking to them. You see it in other Irish Americans who aren't serving in these regiments are talking about, we saw the Irish Brigade, we saw Mar. The newspapers, they're writing about them, everyone mentions them, and so they've become the de facto reason that everyone thinks the Irish were in the war. You know, this is the unit in the conflict. You think Irish at Gettysburg, what do you think of?
Irish Brigade.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, they are the most important, but every monument up and down the road here had Irish Americans in it, more or less, on the Union side. We're dealing with in and around 250,000 Irish Americans serving in federal forces.
And that's in the Union forces.
In the Union forces.
And there are additional in the Confederate forces. Do we have a rough number?
Yeah,
what that might be?
David Gleason, who's done a lot of work on this in the Confederacy, has about 20,000 Irish born.
20,000.
Yeah, and there's about 180,000 Irish born in the north. So there's about a 9-to-1 disparity actually between the two sides.
Okay.
And it's based on population.
Sure, that makes sense.
The Irish actually serve in the high proportions in the Confederacy as well, based on their population. But the minute you have New York and Pennsylvania and Massachusetts in particular on a field anywhere, and if the regiments are urban units, there are Irish all through them. So that's one of the most important things. But the Irish Brigade, you know, are the main representatives. They were then, they are now, and so they're very much worth talking about. There's no doubt about it.
And so they were from which states? What units are we talking? Now, some of our viewers will know this, but some of them won't. So why don't you...
So the original Irish Brigade, as it's formed, is 3 New York regiments. It's formed by Thomas Francis Marr, who was an 1848 revolutionary in Ireland. He came to the United States. He was a very noted orator, a great speaker, and he looked to set up the brigade. And the first 3 regiments go out in New York are the 63rd, the 69th and the 88th New York. And so they go off and they're engaged in the peninsula. They're joined by the 29th Massachusetts, which again people often say is made up of Plymouth Pilgrims. There are plenty of Irish in 29th Massachusetts as well.
All right.
But at 29th Massachusetts, not an ethnic Irish regiment, serve with them to places like Antietam. And then after that they leave, and 2 new units come in, the 28 Massachusetts, who had served in different parts of the war before that, and 116 Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So by the time they come here, those five regiments, the 63rd, 69th, 88th, New York, 28 Mass, 116 Pennsylvania. And they have gone through Fredericksburg together as a group.
Right.
And, of
And
course,
so, Damian, not to interrupt, but
Yeah.
these are small, right? The Irish Brigade of Gettysburg has been engaged in a lot of battles. So this is a small brigade, right? As far as
it's
the numbers.
ridiculously small, man. And if you take the three New York regiments,
Yeah.
you look at them at Antietam, they're all in kind of 350s, 320s, 330s. You look at them at Fredericksburg, they're in the kind of 250, 220s, 210s.
Yeah.
And then after those two catastrophic battles that really, to all intents and purposes, destroyed the brigade, none of those three New York regiments can even muster 100 men. And so when they come here to fight, they actually fight. There's only two companies each. They've all been consolidated. Officers have lost their positions, and they serve as one unit. The three companies actually go in as if they're one regiment. So the 28 Mass is kind of carrying the weight. They've got, I think, it's 230 odd men or 220 odd men here. They're the main, center of the Irish Brigade during the Battle of Gettysburg.
And they are part of the 2nd Union Army Corps,
Yes.
1st Division, 2nd Union Army Corps,
Yes.
John Curtis Caldwell.
Yeah.
Caldwell's division had 4 brigades here at Gettysburg, and they're part of that. But like you mentioned, pretty small. And tell me a little bit about quickly, and we're going to speak a little more about it when we go over there, but who was the commanding officer, Irish Brigade of Gettysburg?
So at this point, Thomas Francis Meagher, who everybody knows, has gone. He has resigned because he wanted to refill the brigade. He wanted to bring it out so it could be refitted, and it was refused. And so he resigns in protest. Nobody, from Lincoln to most of the senior commanders, is particularly pushed that Thomas Francis Meagher is gone. He wasn't, he's loved by the Irish. He wasn't a particularly highly regarded battlefield commander. And he's replaced by a guy called Colonel Patrick Kelly, who had
Another great name, Irish name, everybody. Patrick Kelly, you
does
can't
not
go
get
wrong.
much more better than that. It's just so Irish. And he's from a place called Castle Hackett in County Galway, and he's come up through the 88th New York Infantry. He had been in the 69 New York State Militia, and he's commanding them on the field here.
Okay, and then so on July 2nd, 1863, Sickles has advanced and gone out into Wheatfield. Elements of the 2nd Union Army Corps are going to go into the Wheatfield to help fight the Confederates in the Wheatfield on the second day, in the afternoon of July 2nd. And the Irish troops are going to get general absolution before they go into battle. So before we head over to the Wheatfield, we're here at the Father Corby statue. Damian, tell us a little bit about Father Corby and this whole act of absolution. Everybody asks me about it. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know. What can you tell us about it? Because it's appropriate being right here where we're at.
So just in relation to him, he's a really interesting, I was mentioning about the 250,000 Irish. About 70,000 of those are the children of Irish immigrants, right? Who see themselves as ethnically Irish. It's because there's a lot of nativism, a lot of anti-Irish sentiment, a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment. They tend to be fairly ethnically cohesive.
Okay.
And Corby is interesting when you're talking about that because Corby is born in Detroit. He's not born in Ireland, but he's into an Irish family.
Okay.
And he goes into the priesthood. He's trained by the Holy Cross and is over in Notre Dame. And so when the war begins, there's a call for chaplains, and Father Corby is assigned as chaplain to the 88th New York Infantry, the Irish Brigade. And a lot of chaplains kind of come and go during the war, but apart from the fact that he's so famous for what he did at Antietam and Gettysburg, he stays the course. He's there for 3 years serving with the Irish Brigade, and a lot of chaplains don't last that long. So he's a really inspirational figure. I always think he looks quite old here, but he was actually, I think, 29.
Wow.
That's what a beard does for you.
And then he will give absolution for the men's sins before they go into battle. This is very important to soldiers in the brigade, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
I think it's something that we sometimes kind of forget because there's obviously great reverence in the scene. Hancock is here, takes off his hat. So somewhere, if it was here, it might have been. There's arguments.
And we think maybe it might have been north of where we're at, near where the Pennsylvania Memorial
we're
is.
definitely close to
Monuments here, but we're close.
Yeah.
Close enough on the Gettysburg battlefield.
So there were about 530 men of the brigade here. And the important thing about Catholics in the army is that there are very few Catholic chaplains. So if you're thinking, we have 250,000 Irish Americans in US service, maybe 200,000 plus of them are Catholics. Will Kurtz, who's a great historian of Catholicism in the war, there's only slightly over 50 Catholic chaplains ever served.
Wow.
So these men have no spiritual access to a priest. And if you're about to go in to battle and die, or if you are dying, one of the most important things to these men is that they get absolution. It's incredibly important for Catholics to get that. And it's a big concern. And actually, some of the Irish Brigade regiments, when they were recruiting, advertised the fact that they would have Catholic chaplains because it gave them that comfort.
Wow.
So
that's Now, let me ask you this quick question. Normally, we think of a priest giving absolution to someone that's dying individually.
Yeah.
Is it unusual at this time to do a blanket absolution? Is that kind of unusual, or is it not?
It wasn't for Corby because he did it at Antietam.
Okay.
He did it at Antietam as they were going into
but
something.
Before the war or during the war?
No, it would have been fairly unusual.
Okay.
And so like what he's doing here, and I suppose it's worth kind of talking about, like all the men kneeling here he calls on them to do their contrition. So they're kneeling there, muttering the contrition to themselves, and then he is absolving them. So that if they die, they have confessed and they're kind of clean to go up to their maker. That's why it's so important to them. And I will just touch on it. It's one of the interesting things when you look at the men who don't have access to this. So the Excelsior Brigade, who fought down in the Peach Orchard, huge numbers of Irish in that unit. Somewhere in the region of about a third of their fatal casualties are Irish American, but they have no Catholic chaplain.
Wow. Okay.
And their Congregationalist chaplain talks about up to 2/3 of the men coming to his services were Catholic because they wanted some spirituality. And the other thing that Irish guys used to do was they would then have things like, if they didn't have access to a chaplain, they would do things like wear their physical sacramentals around their necks, things like Agnus Dei and scapular and rosary beads. And you might recall in Antietam in 1988, when they found some Irish Brigade remains in front of the sunken lane, they found those objects with them. Oh. And so they're carrying them in when they don't have access to a priest. But just to say as well, chaplains are not just doing that. I have, in fact, letters in relation to Father Corby, where men are giving him their money, and Father Corby is making sure that they're getting back to families and stuff. So they're performing a huge amount of roles apart from the spiritual side. But it was a really, really significant moment for those men who thought we could die here, and it would have given a lot of them, particularly those who were most faithful, some comfort.
Yeah, that's a whole other video on chaplains at Gettysburg. We had one killed here, and they're regimental postmasters, they're regimental bankers. They do a number of them. They have many interesting roles here, even though they're technically non-combatants. But at least 3 of them received the Medal of Honor in the war in the Union Army.
And they tried to get Corby the Medal of Honor, and didn't succeed. But
So right here is where we would have had this general absolution on the afternoon of July 2nd. And then the troops would have gone right into the wheat field, right, Damian? For July 2nd. So what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to leave here and we're going to head straight over to the wheat field, and we're going to let Damian tell us a little bit about the action there for July 2nd, 1863 at the famed wheat field here. We call it a Walkie Wednesday, but we got to get there fast and time is short. So we're going to go by vehicle, and we're going to pick this back up over with the Irish Brigade over there. So Damian, this is great. We're not going to look at Father Corby the same, I think, anymore. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Wayne.
I appreciate it. All right, we just left Father Corby. We came over to the wheat field, to the iconic Irish Brigade monument. And Sarah behind the camera was saying it's one of the most photographed monuments on the Gettysburg battlefield. It's one of the most visited here for the second day's action. Damian, tell us a little bit about it. So we left Father Corby, and those units came right across south of the Pennsylvania Monument, heading over here to the wheat field to relieve, well, relieve's the wrong word, but to support Sickles.
So they're marching in, and we were discussing the 28 Massachusetts are the biggest single regiments. So the 3 New York regiments are fighting as one. And so the New Yorkers are going in on the left with the 28 Mass in the center and the 116 Pennsylvania on the right. And so they advance across the wheat field towards the Stony Hill, where we are now. And they initially engaged Confederates at Kershaw up here and managed to drive them off Stony Hill, right? So they're taking casualties as they go, these 530 men. But, it's not that bad. But where things seem to go very bad for them when you read the reports and you're looking at what happens is actually when the second Confederate move is made, which I think
This would be Wofford's brigade. So
Yeah.
when the Peach Orchard is broken through,
yeah.
Barksdale's men sort of turn. Wofford comes in behind that and comes in behind then,
Yeah.
which would be behind where the viewers are, behind where these troops are. And so they're going to get hit from these multiple directions.
Yeah, they're
right?
talking about this converging fire coming in, and they're driven off Stony Hill, and of course so we're at the front of their position.
Yeah.
But when you look at what they're saying in the reports, it's this fleeing, this retreat back across the wheat field.
Okay.
Is where they're being cut down in very significant numbers. So men are dying up here, but it's back as they're trying to go escape, if you like, out of the jaws that are closing on them, where they lose the majority of their
So
casualties.
they're getting hit by the infantry fire from the right of Kershaw's men, because the left is sort of up by the Peach Orchard, and Wofford is coming down. So they're getting hit. They got all this fire hitting them.
Yeah, and they're taking in the end. I think it's about 37% casualties the brigade takes, about 198 men.
And the one thing I guess we should say is, we think of these brigades as being very long lines, and that would be if you had a lot of men. But but in the case you just mentioned, they've only got like 532 men at the start.
Yeah. And
so,
two of the New York regiments have 72, 3 men.
So it's like a couple companies. That's all it is,
Exactly.
basically.
Yeah. And the 116th is very small as well.
Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the monument, but before we do, Damian, when these units left Gettysburg, did they get resupplied, or did they get more troops, or what happened to them? They're so decimated in numbers.
So the Irish Brigade story is interesting because it kind of tends to get left at Gettysburg, I think. Yeah, that's true, of course, of a lot of units, I think, because the overland is so horrendous. So their numbers are terrible, but there's a big recruitment drive over the winter, if you like, of 63, 64, and they are replenished to go into the wilderness. But at wilderness and Spotsylvania, the overland generally. I'll give you a letter that I have from a new company that was formed in January of 1864, joins the Irish Brigade, and he's writing at the end of the overland campaign, writing home, and he says, "Friend Pat, of our company, there's only 8 of us left." That's the new company that has been added to the brigade. So the brigade is destroyed again during the overland. It has there's a further influx comes in, but there's a mass desertion of the 69th New York, which causes a lot of issues. The brigade is actually broken up for a short period of time.
Okay.
And then Robert Nugent, who was one of the original officers of the brigade, kind of gets it back together, gets the New York regiments back together.
Yeah.
And so the Irish Brigade does see out the war, but it's a different unit, more or less, from here on.
They had multiple commanders during the war, right?
It did, Tom Smith, who fights up in the centre, from another Corkman, last general to die in the American Civil War. He commands it for a period of time.
Oh, wow.
Patrick Kelly is killed at Petersburg, who commands it here.
Yeah.
Richard Burns from Cavan, who commands it for a period, is killed at Cold Harbour. And Nugent is its last commander.
Okay. Now, this monument's dedicated, and you have a really poignant account tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is Dennis Burke. Dennis Burke was the senior officer in the 88 New York. He was the captain, so he was commanding the 88 New York on the field here. And he came back when they dedicated this monument in 1888. Father Corby came back. But this is how he ended his speech as he dedicated this monument, which tells us what its purpose is.
Yeah.
I'll just read it. Comrades, our task is performed. We have unveiled this pile, and it will stand to perpetuate the fame of those heroes. To keep their memory green in the American heart, the Celtic cross has been erected. It is an emblem of Ireland, typical of faith and devotion, and most appropriate that could be raised to hand down to posterity the bravery of our race in the great cause of American liberty. To our dead it will be unknown, for all the plaudits we can speak, all the honours we can give, all the monuments we can raise cannot awake the dawnless sleep of the tomb. Still, in the coming years it will raise its front to heaven, and in lettered language tell to those who shall come after us how bravely their fathers battled and bled for the old flag and human liberty. And as the sympathetic ivy clings around it, and the turf is warmed by the footsteps of freedom's worshippers who shall visit here, it will stand as a shrine at whose footstone the patriots shall be buoyed with hope, and those who are yet slaves in their native land, nerved with an earnest and impassioned valour to meet the foeman who opposed them, as did the brigade and their comrades on this field of renown,
where the liberties of the nation were saved and perpetuated for the glory and benefit of millions yet unborn.
Wow. And Burke has an interesting history.
Well,
I know we don't have much time, but this guy's a true rebel, right?
Well, you see, he's referring there to those who were still enslaved, and he's referencing the Irish and the British. And Burke is a dedicated Fenian. After the Civil War, he's not had enough. He goes back to Ireland and is arrested and imprisoned for a number of months in Dublin, in Mountjoy, along with a number of other Irish officers who were American Civil War veterans. And eventually is told, get away on back to America there, and don't come back. So, and he was from my home county as well, actually.
Surviving Gettysburg and getting locked up. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we want to, before we leave though, we want to make sure we mention a little bit about the 28th Massachusetts as well. We've got other regiments here in the Irish Brigade, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
This is to the 3 New Yorkers. So we're going to make one more stop and talk a little bit about that. So thanks again. All right, we just came up here to the top of Stony Hill. We're with the 28th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment. So the Irish Brigade had units other that you mentioned, other than the New Yorkers that were here, although they seem to get a lot of the play, and we're by the Irish Brigade plaque, the 28th, right behind Damian and myself. So, Damian, this comes right up to the top of the hill, which is exactly what you said, where we're at. Yeah. And then these folks are driven off of here, right?
Yeah. And I will say, Wayne, I wonder how many people go down to the other monument and think that's to the entire brigade, knowing that the 116 Pennsylvania and 28.
Yeah, and let's do this. Let's swing around. Oh, we got a lot of cars. We picked a bad time. Hold it. Take 5 seconds. Commercial. Okay, now move. Here, just behind Davey and I, the 116th Pennsylvania, and St. Clair Mulholland. He's the guy that gets a lot of write up on this thing, right? But his is
he likes to write.
He likes himself too, doesn't he? He doesn't. All right, we're going to move back over here.
Like all good.
That was in real time. We moved right when the cars were here. So yes. We've got issues too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's here. Now, all that was funny, but this serious stuff, they're taking some heavy casualties.
Well, we were mentioning 28 Mass are the largest single regiment coming in here. Yeah, they take the most casualties. There's 198 casualties in the Irish Brigade. 100 of them are in the 28 Mass.
100 casualties out of 198.
Yeah, in that one. So men who aren't represented on the famous monument, if you like.
So your 37% you mentioned, the majority is going to come from...
Yeah, because they're the biggest unit. And they're a fully Irish unit. You know, the 116th, it never, for example, carried a green flag into action because it was a bit more mixed. It was Irish and Germans and things. 28 had originally... most of them had thought they were going to be part of the Irish Brigade from the off.
And that's a Boston regiment. 116th is like Philadelphia.
Exactly. Okay. But the 28 Mass think they're going to go off with the Irish Brigade initially, and then they get sent down south, so they fight at the Battle of Secessionville, and then they're actually part of the 9th Corps at Antietam and places, so they do fight at Antietam.
Battle of Secessionville, look it up, everybody. Yeah. No, we should tell them it's in South Carolina. But we'll give you a little break, but you got to look it up.
but I thought it'd be good while we're here to just talk about one of the men who fought here with 28 Massachusetts.
Yeah,
and he's another guy from my own home county of Limerick.
And this is a letter you found.
This is a letter I found. I want to give you a bit of a backstory of him. His name was Joseph Ph.D. And just one of the things the Irish have a lot of these guys are the breadwinners for their families, that their parents rely on them, right? So Joseph enlists in 1861. He says he was 18. He was at most 17. He could have been 16. He was probably 17, right? He enlisted in the army. His father is a day labourer who was bedridden for a lot of the time. He was only in his early 40s, but the backbreaking work that he was doing in Boston had effectively destroyed his career. His mother had gone deaf, and so Joseph is the main breadwinner. 2 of the other children had died before. He was a clerk, right? So this is one of the things about the Irish. The Irish are emigrating. His father's a day labourer, an unskilled emigrant. His son is on the path up, right? He could go enlist, right? So Joseph gets promoted to corporal. He gets wounded at the Battle of Chantilly then, captured and exchanged. So he misses Antietam. He misses 28 joining the Irish Brigade. He misses Fredericksburg. And he returns just after Fredericksburg to the regiment. And he writes home to his parents about it. So he's kind of in the aftermath. And I'm just going to read it. So it's camped near Fredericksburg, 20th of January, 1863. Dear parents, I first came here yesterday, and I find it much more comfortable than the parole camp. Dear parents, I am sorry to say that I am denied the privilege of seeing you at present, but I trust that I shall see you yet in Boston with the help of God. Dear parents, we are brigaded with the 88th Connacht Rangers. 88 New York are named for British Army regiments from Ireland. And the 69th Fága Balla, along with the 63rd, all from New York. So you see, there is another Fága Balla regiment along with our regiment now. Fága Balla was an Irish war cry, cleared away.
Yeah, it's on the monument
On
right
the
over
monument.
here behind us.
On the
So
monument.
yeah.
I was surprised when I came here to see so few men in our once fine regiment. Our company, when we left Camp Cameron, mustered 100 men rank and file. Now all that remains of them fit for duty is 25. Wow. The rest have been killed, wounded and disabled. So you can imagine how much it suffered since it left Boston. He goes on to talk about friends who were killed in the Battle of Fredericksburg. And he ends the letter by saying, I must close now by sending you all my love. I promised my brother Michael $10, this is his 12-year-old brother back in Boston, when I get paid, but you can use your judgment about giving it to him. If he's a good boy, I suppose he shall deserve it. Give my love to him and to Johnny, his brother who was 8 years old, and Baby, who was his sister Honora, who was only 5, and to Mr. Hayes and family and all inquiring friends. And then he adds, I hear how Mary Prendergast is getting married. Goodbye. I send my love to you. So I wonder, was he interested in
Yeah,
lady?
yeah,
But Joseph is promoted to sergeant because of the losses, and he is killed here
He's killed again.
on the 2nd of July. And his parents sent in a series of his letters. That is the last letter, the latest letter.
And this is a letter in his pension file.
In his pension file, to prove that he was sending them money for their support. And that support ends, of course. That's the other side of it, and all of that. So, yeah, one of those lost.
Well, folks, I wish we could spend some more time here with Damian, but you've got the Cliff Notes version of the Irish Brigade at Gettysburg. 532 men, 37% casualties here for July 2nd, 1863. Damian's got a new book out on the Irish in the Civil War. So tell us the title.
Green and Blue, Irish Americans in the Union Military.
LSU Press. So you got to pick it up if you're interested in the Irish. We appreciate having Damian with us, going over all this. Damian, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Wayne.
We want to thank all of you for your support. Please like, share, and thank you for everything you do to help the Gettysburg Foundation, help the Gettysburg National Military Park, and the Eisenhower National Historic Site. So stay with us on these social media channels. Thanks.